and my question does overlap with your speech. You've talked at length in the speech about the case for the voice, but I thought I would pose a question that really looks at people who are reluctant about this change. They're sceptical. They might be called the soft nose. Maybe they're resistant to change in general. Maybe they're particularly concerned about changing the Constitution. They might say, well, look, why can't we have consultation in other formats? Why does it have to be this particular change to the Constitution? So what's your message to them? Why does it have to be this way?
Well, there's a habit in government circles of consulting with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, and their methods and approaches have become tick box, if you like. And what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people really want rarely makes its way through the bureaucratic haze. Bureaucrats say, oh, we consulted with them, but often we find that what we said is not reflected in the outcome. A very good example is family and domestic violence. Many of us who work in this field have been calling for years for a standalone national action plan for family and domestic violence in Indigenous communities, because it takes on very different forms and must be dealt with in different ways from the typical intimate partner violence in cities and towns and suburbs where, yes, Indigenous Australians are sometimes involved, but much of the violence in our communities takes different forms, and it takes place in very different settings, social and kinship settings, and of course the context of police engagement with families where violence is occurring often results in the women being the victims being arrested rather than the perpetrators, and child protection services being automatically called by the police and the children removed into out-of-home care, leaving Indigenous women terrified of calling for help for fear that they themselves as victims might be arrested, or even that their partners might be arrested, and particularly that their children will be removed. And so this is why we need to listen to our frontline workers and adopt the measures that they put in place. However, for the many years that we've been raising these issues, we were not listened to, and it was not reflected in the National Action Plan at all, and there have been several of them. We've finally, under this government, had a constructive engagement with the Minister, and we've had some input into the National Action Plan, which is now a standalone Indigenous Action Plan, and we hope for better outcomes. And so we cannot reduce the extraordinary rates of violence in our communities unless our people, both perpetrators and victims, are directly engaged in the measures. So that has been on my radar for many years. In fact, the last time I spoke here was with Jacinta Price, now Senator Jacinta Price, on this very matter many years ago. And that's just one of the issues. Another is the suicide of children. Governments have not been listening. Police have not been listening. There have been coronial inquiries, and we need reforms and measures put in place that are recommended by Indigenous communities. The fate of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children is really one of our great existential threats. If you look at the incarceration rates for Aboriginal children, they're probably the highest in the world. In the Northern Territory, 100% of the children in detention are Aboriginal. As an example, there have been inquiries of late looking into the detention centres, and some children have been held in isolation for more than 200 days. And it's not just Don Dale, it's not just Banksia Hill, it's also occurring in South Australia, and it's also occurring in Victoria, where the rate of Aboriginal removal, rate of removal of Aboriginal children from their families is the highest in the country. So this is why we need to have a voice to address the federal system, the Commonwealth and the states and territories with a suite of measures that will actually work in Indigenous communities. All of these statistics have been becoming progressively worse over the years. So there's really no wriggle room. If matters continue as they are, in just 2 or 3 years, the rates of disadvantage will exponentially increase, threatening lives, and especially the lives of the young. As I said, 60% of our population are under the age of 25. We can't have a situation where the states resort to criminalising and incarcerating children as the only solution for their behaviour. There are other measures, and we know of many programs that work to keep children out of juvenile detention. And one of them, for instance, is restorative justice or justice reform measures that begin early in life to encourage children to choose the pathway that will keep them out of juvenile detention. Also, for instance, just an example from the state I live in, the Koori courts in Victoria work marvellously well. And one of them has had a special brief on breaches of apprehended violence orders in relation to family and domestic violence, and that's working very well. So I could go on and on. These are complex policy issues. We need to consider the Federation as the system in which these policies are developed. Each state will want its own jurisdictional solutions, but they must be based on solutions that will work in the communities, not solutions that somebody in Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne thinks will work.